Every company today is at least thinking of digitizing their operations, or at least part of their operations. However, most companies see this as a task so daunting that ultimately the gain doesn't seem to outweigh the pain. From 8-figure quotations for implementation to statistics that point to high failure rates, it can be difficult to make a compelling case to make the change. And yet, the pressure to be a fully integrated part of Industry 4.0 persists. That might be beginning to change. Not the need for greater operational technology, but the hurdles in bringing it into your organization. I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for joining me here on A Seat at the Table. This episode marks A Seat at the Table's 3rd anniversary. I want to thank all of you who've been with us here since our first episode launched on August 18, 2020, as well as everyone who's joined us over the past 3 years. We've got some exciting guests lined up for the coming year, and I'm looking forward to having you with us as part of our global community. Today we're joined by Tom Pierce, President of Integrated Information Systems, which helps companies integrate business planning, cost and schedule analysis, and cross-functional collaboration. Tom has parlayed his diverse background that includes military service, pastoral ministry, and application software to developing an approach to ERP solutions that combines human intelligence with innovative software, thus bridging the gap between human and computer systems. Today, Tom will be discussing the art of ERP implementation, why it's more than just science, balancing human and technological resources for maximum efficiency, integrating legacy MRP, ERP, and logistics systems with emerging technologies, and how software solutions can benefit small and medium-sized businesses. Digitizing your business also requires having the right people on board who can lead the way as teams adapt to new technology. However, finding the right people to fill key executive positions is not always easy. In fact, it's becoming extremely difficult. That's why leading organizations turn to AsiaNet consultants. AsiaNet has a well-earned reputation for being able to recruit candidates for even some of the toughest search assignments. To find out more about them, check out their website at asianetconsultants.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. Meanwhile, let's sit down with Tom and find out why we might want to rethink our views on digitization. Tom, thank you so much for joining us here today on A Seat at the Table. I think what you're talking about resonates with so many people who are listening to this podcast, because certainly we are in the midst of a digital transformation, whether we like it or not. And I think that it's time for most companies to take the break off. And a lot of them, it's not easy to do. It's a big leap of faith. And a lot of people are struggling to really find the right path and understand what they could be doing or should be doing.
And those are good distinctions, the woulds and the shoulds, and the comfort with what's familiar versus the uncertainty of the unknown. I think there's just an awful lot of psychology involved in people. Certainly the phrase digital transformation is very meaningful. I think it's important to always keep in mind that there's a lot of human transformation involved as well.
Yes.
People change more slowly than technology does.
We get into a comfort zone. We get used to doing what we've been doing. And especially if you're in a fast-paced environment, even if you want to learn new things, you just don't have the bandwidth, because there's the wanting to try something new, the wanting to upgrade the business, but at the same time, you have pressure to meet deadlines, right? You sometimes have financial pressures that make you think twice or maybe more than twice about any kind of CapEx investment. So people are facing a lot of different challenges.
Exactly. I find a lot of humor in human behavior, even though I think it's worth examining and analyzing all of that. But one of the things I find most humorous, I recently sold an old Lincoln that had some, fairly nice technology that I got tired of repairing. And what I replaced it with is an old truck that I listen to AM radio, because that doesn't break.
Right.
And then I've seen a similar phenomenon with the people that are really embracing the self-driving car. Why do you want a self-driving car? So I don't have to think about driving.
Right.
So what are you going to be doing? I'm going to be playing with my phone and playing with the radio and doing all the other technology except for the driving. Our minds are going to stay engaged. It's what do we want the computer to do for us and what do we want to do ourselves is the constant battle.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to frame it. And nobody has ever expressed it that way. So I think it's great that you were able to point it out from that point of view. Now, talk about the art of ERP implementation and why it's more than just a science. I think that's really
Yes.
interesting. We never think of ERP having an artistic side to it. What are you seeing around that?
Thank you for noticing that. For one thing, I've been at this, 40 years. So I have noticed over the years that the technical people that I love working with most have strong artistic flares. I'm
Interesting.
surrounded by musicians and artists and sculptors, and because there is an awful lot of creativity involved in relating to the technology. And if we do too much of the black box of technology, then you end up with the old just trust me for whatever happens inside the box. And we humans are skeptical.
Right.
No, show me your work. I think one of the reasons why there's so much controversy over whether or not Excel is a legitimate business tool, right?
Right.
It's too easy to change. Well, that's its strengths and its weakness.
Right.
Because when you're using Excel, I can see what you did. When it
Right.
just comes out on the screen, I don't know how you got that answer.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the artistry is in how to communicate. It's a relational art. It's a soft art of you're not just trying to get the computer to do what you want it to do. You want to build relationships between the workforce, the humans that are using the computers. And, there's a translator's task involved. And I think that's where the artistry of it. There is beauty in really good technology that people can't explain why they love it. They just love it. And that's where the artistry of connecting the humans to the technology in a way that just feels right.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I think that probably the person who illustrates that the best would be Steve Jobs at Apple, because he's been credited with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And strangely enough, we're about the same age. I was coming into the computing field a couple of years before Bill Gates announced Windows and
Oh,
Steve
wow.
Jobs announced Apple. So, I watched them emerge as great leaders. And contrasting the two personalities is, of course, that's a whole nother conversation. But yes, I absolutely. Jobs understood the aesthetic appeal of wanting to use the computer.
Right.
Because so many people hate their computers.
Yes.
The toxicity of the relationship, even now, I think with the emergence of so much interest in AI, there is genuine fear on the part of a lot of potential users that AI is smarter than them, might replace them, might make them less valuable, might make them feel less competent. So you've already got an animosity built up between people and the technology being forced down their throats. When what you really want, and I still remember a neighbor of mine when I told it that Jobs had introduced this computer that they were going to call the Apple, his eyes lit up. That everybody's going to want an Apple.
Right.
To have technology people want to use, we get a lot to learn from the gaming industry, right? Programmers split. Early in my career, they split into business applications programming versus gaming. And the gamers understood what it meant to motivate people, to make people want to play the game, to want to explore that passageway. I started in the military, and I had a colonel come to me one time and say, "Can you take the software you've written and make people want to use it? Reward them for doing it right." And it's like, that's the most fascinating challenge I've ever heard. But so much people hate the technology they're forced to use. When you can get technology in their hands that they love, that's a different category.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. And I hadn't thought about it from that point of view myself before you brought it up, that actually it's oftentimes the same technology behind business applications and gaming. And yet gaming is something people can't stay away from. And business technology is oftentimes things people want to run from.
Exactly. And you end up going to conferences where the whole point is, how do we get our chief executive to put more pressure on people to force them to use the technology we bought for them? It's like, oh my God, how did we get there?
I
thought you were actually trying to help people. But
Yeah, you create their own little avatar, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it is very interesting when you look at it from that point of view.
And when you mention it, in the ERP space, I think that's where the cross-functional understanding is so essential. We tend to stovepipe ourselves in functionalities, uh, partly, organically, naturally. People develop expertise in certain areas. I've got a piece of software that's going to help this kind of person, that sort of thing. But how the computers work together, if you have multiple systems, and almost everybody does, is very similar to how the people work together. So a part of the artistry of integrating computer systems or information systems is really not that different from getting people to work together, which you have to consider all of the strengths and weaknesses of the collaboration. And I think that's really where the artistry comes in. I like the musical analogy of getting the choir and the orchestra to come together. You're not looking for unison. You're looking for harmony and symphony, where you are really paying attention to the relationships between the humans and their technology and each other. And then, I joke about it, but I have a Vivint security system and an Alexa system.
Right.
And I can't talk to my security system, but I can ask Alexa to talk to my security system. So I'm saying, Alexa, please tell Vivint to turn the temperature up.
Wow.
And, I think they talk about me behind my back, but I'm not sure. So we get more and more into the relational aspects of humans, computers, technology. And the people who are really good at writing software make you want to use it.
Yes, I think that's an interesting point. And I hadn't really, like I said before, thought about it from that point of view. And it does appear that there are very few people or companies that are writing software from that perspective. I think it looks like it's always more task-based, efficiency-based, and right. And the user interface tends to be, other than, like you said, in the gaming side of things, not really prioritized. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
And I think that's where it plays to the incentives. But most of my clients are SAP users. SAP dominates the sphere. Apparently, SAP's marketing strategy early on was to sell to CEOs, not CIOs.
Right.
They marketing themselves to the decision makers, to the powerful, to the, and they expect the executives to make the employees comply. Where the gaming community is appealing directly to the end users and responding to the incentive of it's actually the user that's going to pay for the software.
Right.
Where in business you get the triangle, the classic service triangle, where the person paying for the software is not the person using the software. They're going to have to get somebody else to use. So bridging that gap is an interpersonal challenge.
Yeah, it certainly is, especially when, like you said, the person paying for it might not understand why the people using it have resistance to it. And sometimes, don't really want to hear that. And yet you hear that, you hear that all the time. Companies invest in technology and then the staff don't want to use it, or they find workarounds to not use it. And it's such a waste. Yeah. But
resistant to change.
Yeah, sometimes people will say it's resistant to change, but a lot of times it's resistance to something that takes longer and is more cumbersome.
Exactly. I was a part of one implementation and I had a really bold project leader. He on his wall was a Don Quixote award because he charged windmills with broomsticks all the time. He was an innovator. But they asked him one time after an implementation to record the cost savings of, salaried people because of this successful implementation. He actually reported a negative number because he had to double the size of his staff accommodate the rigor of the software that he was required to use. Most people would have, lied, made up a number of how much money they saved. He actually reported to upper management that he lost money. He ended up getting promoted. He was honest about it.
Yeah.
It didn't save me money. It cost me money.
Yeah. So what can companies do differently? I mean, if we know that this is a problem, from your point of view, how do we approach the challenge, right, of implementing greater ERP and digitization in our organizations in a way that is more user-friendly?
Yeah, rule number one, and if you have to imagine yourself as a gaming programmer, then maybe that'll help.
Right.
But never lose sight of who is the end user. So often you get, executives, middle-level executives, subject matter experts in the room deciding what the software is going to be. And the last step in the implementation is to bring in the end users and train them on how they're going to use it. No, involve them from the beginning. Find out, understand the business process of the technology they're using now. And you don't have to exactly match it or replicate it, but you certainly want it to be an upgrade, not a downgrade in the experience of the end users. And so a lot of people debate theoretically, which is better. It's like the old stereo cabinet, right? Do you want to form your own by the pieces and wire them together, or do you want to have somebody else to configure it? So the big box, the major vendors of ERP system are trying to do the all-in-one solution and then gather up all the functional people and say, okay, you have to change the way you do your job to fit our all-in-one system. That might be a good solution if all of the key end users are happy with it, if it feeds everybody, but it's not going to. So the other extreme is to let each functional area choose the software package that helps them and then find a way to cobble them together well. Well, those are just the two extremes.
Right.
Everybody ends up with some hybrid. Right? You get the standard package and then you do some kind of bolt-ons or custom or no-code, low-code configuration. But it's the difference between buying a suit off the shelf and having it tailored to fit. You've got to allow the time, resources, energy to allow whatever it is, the customization, the configuration, the composability of the software. One size does not fit all. Don't get a bigger hammer and pound your people into the holes that don't fit. Software ought to be flexible. Software systems ought to be. How many different ways can I adjust the driver's seat in my car? Right. I think I got 8 different things I can adjust, and I can adjust. I don't have to call my IT department and say, can you come adjust my car chair? So putting more and more of the fine tuning of the user experience in the hands of the actual user who's experiencing it it's more expensive up front, but it's really worth it long range. My son, who's worked with me 10 years, came up with this analogy that I really like. He feels like software ought to be, in general, 80% standard and 20% custom. So go get yourself a package that's an 80% fit and spend the money on the other 20% to tailor it to your particular needs.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that that's a really good balance between people having something built completely custom from the ground up versus people buying 100% off the shelf.
Exactly.
Now, you talk about balancing human and technical resources for maximum efficiency. I think that's a big challenge that people face these days, with some thinking you can get rid of all these people and and just replace everybody with technology and the place is going to run itself, and others perhaps being more resistant to technology. What are you seeing on that?
So I like the ancient wisdom of there is nothing new under the sun. Things change perspective, they change flavors, you see them from different angles. But early in my Army career, I was involved in a field exercise in the 80s when the Army was experimenting with the first ever computers in the battlefield. And it was masters. But the buzzword became, for the next decade or so, technology insertion. How do we take processes that are working humanly, right? And data is exchanged with soldiers on motorcycles and paper in their pocket. How do you insert automation into that process without disrupting it? and your backup was always to go back to human. I think the script has completely flipped, but it's the same question. Now we're envisioning completely digital processes, completely automated factories, and we're trying to figure out, how do we insert human intelligence? So I've envisioned this flow chart. When I hear people describe their business processes and their automation, well, sometimes they're just running in completely different directions, like, canoeists paddling in different directions, fighting against each other. But when they are working together, the artistry is, how long do you want to let the car drive itself, and when do you want to take control of the wheel? My dad was a pilot. He did a lot of flying on autopilot, but there are certain situations you want to be sure you can press an override button and take the controls. So where do you want the human intelligence inserted in the flow chart? But I always, every time I say that, I have to throw in the caution. I'm kind of a tabula rasa when it comes to human nature. You give humans the opportunity to influence the process, they will use that opportunity for good or evil, depending on all kinds of other incentives. So insert human intelligence can also be insert human deception. And I think a lot of the people that want to shut the humans out are very untrusting of their own people. They really strongly suspicious that what comes straight out of the automation is going to be pristine and error-free. But if they let the humans into it, then all the deception and the lies are going to come in. Well, one of the most humorous things I've seen coming out of the recent ChatGPT and AI stuff is that it lies. Oh my God, who would have thought?
Right.
It would make stuff up it didn't know. Well, gee, maybe it learned that from the humans who taught it, because that's what they do.
Oh my gosh, that's interesting.
The fact that a digital answer is not necessarily more credible, trustworthy, consistent than what a human would tell you. I always like to hear from both.
Right.
The oldest subject matter experts who just know the product and what the computer says. And when there's a difference, it's not a different problem than you have when you've got two vice presidents who see things differently. It's the same problem. You're just having adapted to, okay, which is the more credible source of information in this case, the human or the automated system? And you're hoping to converge, but when those opinions continue to die, you've got to dig deep into the trustworthiness of the source on both ends.
Yeah, I think it's good that you pointed that out because, as you said, people do tend to trust the technology more than people. And it is coming to light with ChatGPT, as much hype around it as there has been and the incredible things it's capable of. You're right. People are now starting to see that it actually is capable of throwing a lot of errors out there, as well as some very awesome results.
Right. And just like with humans, it may or may not be intentional deception.
Right.
Right. It may have been programmed. It may have been taught, trained to slant its output one direction or another. Well, we've been dealing, nothing new. We've been dealing with that with humans our whole lives. You learn who to trust and who not to trust. And the people that are the most dangerous are the people that lie sometimes.
Right,
So,
right. Yeah, that's very good.
Which automated systems you trust and how to build trust. I think the most valuable people in an organization are going to be the people that are bilingual, really good at communicating with the technology and really good at communicating with the humans, because they're going to be the universal translators that every organization needs.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I hadn't thought about it like that, but you're right. You do need that bridge in between both sides, because as you're pointing out, there's a very important place for both human and technology in an organization. So now it's really, as you're saying, creating that bridge, that channel of communication so that you have efficiency on both sides.
Exactly. One of my earliest formative stories in my career, I was a young lieutenant and I went to the logistics center of Fort Lee, Virginia. Huge facility covering just all kinds of fascinating challenges. But there was a major highway going right down the middle of Fort Lee. And on the west side of the highway, in those buildings were all the retired military subject matter experts who really knew what needed to be done. On the other side of the highway were all of the young, my age at that time, tech savvy, innovative, smart folks who came to work in shorts and flip flops, but knew how to make the computers. Watching those two groups of people try to talk to each other in the meeting was comical.
Yeah.
The humans did not speak the same language. And so there's been this running thing for decades. It hasn't gone away. It changes. But the running joke is to a programmer, oh my God, don't give them what they asked for, give them what they need.
Right.
Because they're not the same thing.
Yeah.
But if you can capture that miscommunication and lack of understanding early and embed tech savvy and subject matter expertise in the same conversations from the beginning, not here's the document of what I want, go off for a year, come back, I'll tell you that that's not what I wanted at all, but to actually build the relationships. But now you've got humans and multiple computer systems all in that same network of people and devices that are seeking to understand each other.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good way to look at it. And I think that people need to hear that because everyone's trying to figure this out, trying to get up to speed. And a lot of people don't have your experience doing it. So they're sort of grasping at straws and not really sure even what framework to use in order to make the best possible decisions.
There is a good bit of trial and error involved in it. And I understand the approach anxiety. You climb up to the high dive and you walk out to the board and then you're not really sure if you want to dive off.
Right.
Because there is such a huge change, such a huge crisis of change in a major digital transformation. I also think the human transformation is a part of that equation, where you can incrementalize it. When you can take smaller bites, take the big elephant in smaller bites. A lot of the major sellers are going to discourage you from doing that. But you can automate, a smaller product line and then go to a larger product line. You can automate a building, you can automate a function. You want to have in mind up front the organic growth in. But so many executives try to compress that schedule because they think they're going to save money by doing it faster. And in the end, you're not giving the humans time to process the impacts of the decision they've made. So I think one of the solutions to the anxiety problem, I think most ERP implementations, about the number was 30% of this leaves the company during a typical implementation because the stresses are so high. If you can ease that stress by relaxing your schedule, it's going to take the humans years to adapt anyway. If it's going to take them 5 to 7 years to adapt to all this change, why is it so important to accomplish the change in 3 months rather than 6?
Right.
Be a gradualist of new technologies. Nothing wrong with having a 5-year vision of what you're trying to accomplish. You just don't have to accomplish it in 5 months.
Right. Yeah. I think people feel very pressured right now that this is happening fast and we need to do it fast. And fast isn't always, as you're pointing out, the optimal pace for things. Now, you talk about integrating legacy MRP and ERP into emerging technologies. And man, that's for a lot of companies a real speed bump because people who have invested in technology all along and have systems, you can't really throw out the existing systems, and yet you need to figure out how to dovetail the new ones in. It's easier if you're starting from scratch, but a lot of people aren't in that situation.
Which is why the startups have an advantage, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and again, it's the same human thing, right? There's a whole lot of millennials that wish us boomers would just get out of the way so they can run the world their way.
Right.
I get it. I do. Early in my career, before the PC, all the computers were in the computer rooms and all the tech people worked there. And that was the legacy system. Right. And then some of these young whippersnapping engineers said, but I've got this thing called a PC and I can edit my work instructions in WordPerfect. Is there a way I can get that text that I wrote in this really nice tool called WordPerfect? Can I get that into your system? So one of the first innovations I came up with was a script that read the WordPerfect document from their PC and fed it through a dumb terminal into the mainframe, into that system. So we kept the legacy engine, but gradually started replacing the front end and then the back end with more modern technologies. And I've never heard anybody else say this. I'm just going to go way out on a limb. Somebody will sew off the limb, I'm sure. But I think that's where some of the legacy SAP systems are headed.
Right.
There's a whole lot of people that are very reluctant to migrate from ECC to HANA because that's a major migration. A lot of folks will keep the old SAP engine, but they'll use Fiori or other OData routines to upgrade the front end. They'll use Tableau or even Excel or any kind of other reporting technologies on the back end. And what will be left of the legacy system is the business logic that really matters about how to run the business.
Right.
Getting the data in, getting the data out, those are easier to change. Swamp out the engine, well, that's a bigger deal. But you can take the components of your human and digital system and migrate them one at a time to ease some of the crisis and ease some of the pain.
I think that's a really good strategy. And I think that it's practical as well, because people need sort of a step-by-step approach that makes it easy to onboard people. It's just getting people, in a sense, right? The biggest amount of energy is getting people on that on-ramp. Once they're on the highway, it's a lot smoother.
Exactly. It's the most dangerous part of the transition as well.
Yeah.
And it's good to be patient and compassionate with people. I think I'm repeating myself already, but I get quite weary of consultants that think the solution to every problem is more pressure from the chief executive. I don't really think so.
Yeah.
I think clearer vision, more compassion, patience, understanding, and it might cost a little more money than you hoped it would cost, and it might take a little more time than you hope. But if it's worth it. If you don't think it's going to be worth it, don't do it.
Yeah, I think that's very, very good advice. And it is difficult to have people who've spent a lot of time on Excel and are very comfortable with Excel. And now you're migrating them onto something totally different. And especially when you're trying to get them on a new system and they still have to do the same amount of work and meet the same deadlines when it's a very fast-paced business, you can see why they're reluctant to make the change.
One of the things we did with Excel, because I kind of saw that battle emerging early on, and again, aging myself, I wrote my own spreadsheet because nobody else had written one yet on my HP desktop back in the 80s. Now, Excel wrote a much better one than I wrote. I'm in love with Excel. I hate some of it. But we decided to integrate Excel with our SQL Server databases so that we do not use Excel as a data repository.
Right.
But we do use it for both input and output and analysis. The data resides in a relational database that's tightly normalized and it's got all the business logic in there. Excel is a wonderful tool for prototyping development, for prototyping business logic with formulas, but then you migrate the business logic into the database. And once they trust the results, you don't have to show your work. You can black box it, make it more robust, make it more shareable. You can still use Excel as the analytical tool of choice. And of course, it keeps adding new features and, interacting with more systems. But again, that's the difference. Right tool for the right job. Excel, I think, is an outstanding tool to use to analyze data. I think it's not a very good tool at all to store data. I'm sorry, he's got that Excel spreadsheet on his PC and he's on vacation for 2 weeks. We can't get to it. Horrible answer, right?
Yes.
Store the data in a repository, retrieve it with whatever tool you want, analyze it. They should all have the same answers, you know what I mean? Same data.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And you're right. There are ways to use things that people are comfortable with. And at the same time, as you're saying, support it with more sophisticated and more, I don't want to say purpose built, but more suitable for the task.
Exactly. I think a lot of the dynamic comes into play is to what degree do you want to centralize all of your information? If you talk to a room full of IT professionals, it's kind of like restaurant workers who love restaurant work except for all the customers.
Right.
There's a lot of IT professionals that love working in IT if it wasn't for those annoying users that actually want to read the data.
Right.
Their expertise is in storing it and retrieving it and protecting it and making sure nobody hacks it. It's in the vault, but you're not authorized to read it. there is a place for highly controlled, highly centralized data repositories, the most trusted Bureau of Standards, Dead Sea Scrolls kind of authenticity. But that's not the end goal of an IT department. The end goal is to distribute that information to the people that are actually going to use it. And there's a good bit of business logic that I'd be pushed forward as far as possible. Be able to, people say manipulate, but manipulate also includes making pottery. You are, for good or evil purposes, you are putting the data to use for the purpose which I think you intended when you collected it. You didn't collect it to create a storehouse of data. It's got to move to the end user in a form that makes it actionable. One of the best compliments I've ever received for our company was one of our high-level executives said, everybody else gives me data, you guys give me information. That's the goal. You want people to actually understand what they're reading. And you've got to put an awful lot of the art and the creativity and the as close as you can to the hands of the end user, the person interpreting the data to make decisions. That's got to be decentralized.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to approach that problem. And I think you're right. That's going to be the answer for companies to be able to effectively use this, not just to implement it, but to be able to actually make it effective and productive within their organizations.
Exactly. Remember what it's there for. It is a tool.
Yeah, exactly right. Now, we've spoken a lot about how this applies to large enterprises.
Right.
What are the possibilities for a small or medium-sized business? I mean, a lot of smaller companies would probably benefit from these efficiencies, and yet a lot of these systems seem to be out of reach. What's your take on that?
Thank you so much for asking that. You've just nailed the passion of the last phase of my career. I've got two small businesses I'm working with right now. One is a paint shop, one's a machine shop. They're both tier 2 suppliers to my primary client. And you're talking 20 to 50 people. A company's not much larger than my own. And they have an overwhelming amount of complexity and a high volume of data because they're both high mix, low volume service providers. And, they've tried the do-it-yourself approach, whether it's with Excel or Microsoft Access or Dynamics. But it's, in both cases, it's rather, kludgy implementation. It wasn't implemented by an expert. It was forced down their throats by the holding company that owns them. And so what we have done and are in the process of implementing is we're taking 30 years worth of functionality and features and sophistication fit for the aerospace defense industry, and we've condensed it down to a package that has all the features, but we're hiding the features you probably don't care about to streamline it into, if you want, and one of the customers really wants it streamlined, order entry, order tracking, delivery, invoicing. Those are the only features he wants to use. So by configuring the software that we've spent 30 years building and migrating it into a cloud-based architecture that can also be on premises, that's exactly what my passion is. I am trying to take all of the sophistication and put it in a compact package that is not expensive to maintain, support, sustain, intuitive, easy to use. So that's my goal. We've got 2 beta users looking for 3 or 4, hoping to grow. I would love to make what I would consider to be complex but not complicated,
Right.
Simple but not simplistic ERP technology very affordably in the hands of small businesses like mine that just want an answer a little bit better than everybody having their own Excel spreadsheet. And I think we're headed that direction. I'm excited about it.
It sounds very exciting, and I think it will be game-changing for the many, many small and medium-sized businesses out there who we don't really hear about, but in many ways are the foundation of many economies worldwide. So
Absolutely.
To be able to support them as well and enable them to get on board with the new technology and digitization, I think is really, it'll be game-changing for many, many companies and the people who work there. So I
Thank
really
you.
applaud what you're doing. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm excited about it. It's I'm very fortunate. I've been blessed by being around good people and developing a good team. But the timing is just so good for me. I'm at a stage in my career where I'm not looking to make, a ton of money. I'm going to be okay. I am looking to share what I've learned in a way that, kind of makes me proud of what I've done with my career. All the big guys aren't really going to go after. They'll go after the small and medium size, and I get entertained by the definition of what they consider a medium-sized business.
Right.
I'm a small business. I've got a combination of 16 full-time, part-time consultant. I like small businesses, mom and pop shops shouldn't be shut out for this arena. The big guys aren't going to go after them because there's not a lot of money to be. I don't need to make a lot of money. That's the advantage of software. It doesn't cost me much to replicate it, especially if the 80-20 rule works. Mm-hmm. If I could just reuse 80% of what I've done, I'll give that part away for free. The 20% customization will cover my cost and, maybe let me take my grandchildren on a trip sometime. So it's a nice place to be in my career, and it's a nice place to be in the development of technology where, cloud-based software as a service, all these technologies make it easier to share inexpensively technology that's been 30 years in development.
I think that's a really good way to look at it. And I really applaud what you're doing in terms of taking that point of view of how we can help other people as well and sort of help them get on the ladder and, give them a little bit of a boost as well. So,
exactly.
Yeah, Tom, how can people connect with you? I think a lot of people would want to be able to reach out to you and talk about what you're doing and how that might apply to their business.
Thank you for asking. It's I2S for Integrated Information Systems. But it's .us. I lost the bidding war for the .com. So I2S is our website. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Full name of the company, Integrated Information Systems. Would certainly love to make contact, form networks, and collaborate on possible solutions.
Well, that's great. I'm going to put all of that in the show notes so that everyone has the links. And I would encourage anybody who is looking at a digital transformation for their company to reach out to Tom. I think he's a wealth of information, and I think that looking at things from his point of view could make your digital transformation one of the success cases as opposed to all the failures that we hear about.
Thank you so much.
So thank you again for joining us here, Tom.
It's been my honor and my pleasure.